Welcome back to the Skunkworks, and well done for getting through the previous video. If you're doing these videos sequentially, a little bit dry, you might say, but hopefully by watching the series, you're seeing what coding is like. It's not all loops and loops within loops and exciting conditional statements. There's some routine tasks to do, what I would call housekeeping tasks that help us stay on track, including efficiency improvements that we saw in the last video, including regular testing, including going through and annotating the code properly. These help keep the coding process efficient. So I can't not do those videos because they're essential to the process. But the good news today is we're going to do something hopefully a little bit more exciting, because we're at the stage now, I think, where we can begin to identify some more possible moves. And you can see so far we've got our diagonal moves here. So can we easily program the horizontal moves, so moves along the same row if you like, and also the vertical moves, so moves along the same column. Let's try to put those in this series, and hopefully what we're going to find is, because we've built this strong foundation, we've had a steady and systematic approach, we've got clear coding, well annotated coding, well tested coding, we've got robust code. Because you've built this strong foundation, you should be able to have spurts of quick development, and those spurts of quick development are exciting and they keep us motivated. So all of that work is going to count for something. So let's refamiliarize ourselves with this routine. So we've got this current square concept here. So wherever this piece is, the VBA editor kind of identifies its square, and then it kind of works away from that square using these two integer variables. And then we eliminate squares that are outside of the board area. So that's kind of how the code is working. I was able to talk through that because of the annotations, and I did a little bit of familiarization, but it was easy to do the familiarization because the code is properly organized. So all of those tasks we've done are worthwhile. So we get to this kind of critical line of code here, and looking at it, I think it's going to be fairly easy to scale this code up. This critical line of code is identifying if the cell we're on is on a diagonal relative to the cell that the piece is positioned in. And we've done that with this piece of logic. If the row count variable, remember we're kind of counting through the squares. If the row count variable is equal to the column count variable, then we must be talking about a diagonal relative to where the piece is. So we'll be 3 squares up, 3 squares across, 5 squares up, 5 squares across. That means we're on a diagonal. So what logic would we need to say, for example, if the square we're looking at is on the same row as the piece? So suppose we're looking at the pawn here on E2. That's E2 in the chess coordinates, not the Excel coordinates. That's going to get confusing. So if we had a square on the same row, so any of these squares on row 2, how can we describe that logic in a way that VBA is going to understand to identify it as a possible move? And let's just jump in and let's give it a go. So I'm going to say OR here, then go on to the next line, and then let's say row count equals 0. Okay, so very simple there. So this is if on a diagonal. I'm just going to reposition the comments here, or the annotations I usually call them. And can I put one here? I think I can. Yep. No, I don't think I can. I think that's upset the VBA editor. Okay, so I can't put that one there. So I'm going to say if on a diagonal, if on a row. So that's a critical comment there. That's going to help me understand later what this is doing. So if the row count is 0, so if our variable that's counting through the rows, so the kind of up and down variable we could say, if that equals 0, then the square we're looking at is on the same row. The square we're looking at is on the same row as the piece. So that means a horizontal move is possible. And that's the logic we've just articulated in this little line of code, but incredibly powerful line of code here. So what are we expecting to happen now? When we hit a piece, previously we had the diagonal possible moves highlighted. Now we should have the row moves highlighted. We could say that, right? Rather than me talking about it, why don't I just do it? Control S, save the file, clicking a piece. Okay, we can see we've got the row highlighted there. Click another piece. Yep, that resets the board. You can see that's nice and efficient. That's because we dealt with those efficiency improvements. I will stop talking about those eventually. And then we've got the row again there, clicking on that piece. And then let's try the bishop at the back here. We can see clicking on that piece. Now you might be saying, but we just clicked on the bishop and the bishop only moves diagonally. Absolutely right. So we're doing something simpler first, then we're going to build in the assumptions later. And we've got to think about that. How are we going to tell Excel? Well, if it's a bishop, only look at the diagonal moves. If it's a rook, only look at the straight line moves. If it's a knight, look at those weird knight moves. All of that is coming later. We're going to have lots of fun with this series. I can see many, many more videos being made, possibly hundreds. I'm just going to keep going with it because I think I'm finding it good fun. I think there's lots of learning being done out there, judging from the feedback I've got. Okay, so if on a diagonal, if on a row, then let's say if on a column. Let's put a third annotation in there. And then you might want to stop the video and think, how are you going to do this? Well, again, because the code is reasonably well organized, we can use the existing integer variable, which is counting across the columns, and just do the same thing there. So, or then I'm going to need an or in here. Okay, Control, let's save the file. What are we expecting to happen now? Well, we should be highlighting the diagonal moves, the vertical moves, and the horizontal moves. Anyway, as usual, don't listen to me, just test it, and then let's see. Okay, so we can see there. We've got, yep, the horizontal, the vertical, and the diagonal moves there. Okay, let's just try another piece. Good, seems to be working well. So you can see how quickly I was able to scale that up. I was only able to scale that up because I spent the previous video tidying things up, making it efficient and easy to understand. It's really critical that you do that housekeeping. Right, what would we like to be able to do now? Well, I'd like to be able to actually move a piece. Let's move a piece to a different square. Let's just put a piece here, for example. Now I'll just show you how I did that. That was a little bit intricate, we might say. So I right-clicked. I'm on the Windows PC here. I right-clicked on the piece, and then that gives me this little drag option, and that's how I did it. Because if you select the piece, of course, then a macro is going to run. Like usually to select an object in Excel, we just click it and drag it. That's going to be difficult to do because we have a macro running there. Maybe later we'll deal with a routine to kind of switch off that macro temporarily so we can position the pieces. So I want to move the pawn here, for example, and then can I click on the pawn and will the routine highlight the correct spaces? And yes, it has done. Looks like there's a lot of spaces highlighted there, but yep. That does seem to be reasonable. Clicking the pawn again, right click, using the drag handle at the bottom here. Let's reposition the pawn over here. And then let's just click on this. Good. Okay, fine. So this seems to be working reasonably well. I'm just going to reposition the pawn here. Rather than position it manually, I'm going to test one of our earlier routines, just say setup board, and does this work? It's important as you're adding more and more code, more and more functions, go back and check the first ones that you put in. Do they still work? This is another important housekeeping task. It's going to reset the mode there, setup board. Now hopefully, yeah, our pawn is nicely repositioned there. Can we still clear the board? Pieces are gone. Set up the board. Pieces are back. Have we still got the functionality? Yes, we have. And am I still able to move a piece around and then understand if, does Excel get the moves? Yes, it does. So we're just testing testing those. That's interesting. So if I hit setup board, is that something we should think about fixing now? Possibly, yeah. So when I hit setup board, it didn't take me out of this moves mode. So now we've got setup, the board is set up, but we've got all these red borders on here. So maybe I'm going to go to the setup board macro and just see if we can fix that quickly. Position pieces, so call clearboard. We've also got a macro that we just made in the previous video to just correct all of the borders, and I can quickly understand what it is because it has an informative name. Let's just take this, copy paste it, Control C on the Windows PC, and let's put it at the top of this position pieces macro and just say call restore board borders. We'd also like at this point, and this might get a little more complicated than I wanted it to, we'd also like to restore the mode here. Okay, so move us out of how would we say, move us out of possible move mode. So I'm going to say, yeah, okay, let me just go to the engine sheet here. And what does it say here? Moves visible, yes. So we need to reset that cell to no. Okay, so back to the VBA editor here. Yes, so I'm just going to take this line of code and then go back to our routine here. Okay, and then I'm just going to put some annotations here to remind me what's going on. So this is going to change the borders back. Let's say ensure possible moves not showing, and then this one is going to say not in make sure not in possible moves mode. Okay, that's just outside of your screenshot, but I just said make sure not in possible moves mode there. Okay, Control S, save the file. So so now I am in possible moves mode. If I hit setup board now, then we can see it moves us out of possible moves mode there. Clear the board, set up the board. Okay, good. I would like to have, I'd like to have a little message box there, just to look for user confirmation, because you don't want to have a situation where you're halfway through a game and you accidentally click setup board and the game is gone. So it would be appropriate here to have, a message box at the beginning of the routine, just to say, are you sure you want to do this, just to get user confirmation. How might we do that? So we can say if message box, and then we can say reset question mark. So that's what's going to appear in the message box. VB yes no is the type of message box, and then the title is confirm. So we want that text to appear at the top of the message box. Then we say equals VB no. So that means if the user clicks on no in answering the message box, then we just want to exit the sub there. Okay, so that means if the message box, yep. And then let's just say get confirmation. So we should have a message box flashing up here, position pieces, got a message box flashing up just saying confirm, reset. So if I click no there, then nothing's going to happen. How can we test that? Let's just move this pawn, the H pawn forward, hit setup board, and then reset no, and we can see nothing happens there. But if I say reset and yes, then we can see that something is happening there. Now this clear board routine, I think I'm just going to get rid of this button for now. I can't think of a situation where we'd want to clear the board, or maybe we would later for testing purposes. No, I'm just going to simplify here. I'm going to get rid of this button. So we just got one button here allowing us to set up the board. Okay, so a little aside there, I wasn't intending to go down that route in this video, but again, an important lesson for how you're doing your programming. As you're putting in new functions, do the old functions still work? And we could see the newer functions I were putting in were actually adversely affecting the older functions. So I've just gone in, put some lines of code in, done a bit of simplification by deleting that clear board button. Everything seems to be working well. Again, testing, testing, testing. Sounds boring, keeps things simple, and means that we keep wanting to come back to the file because we're not thinking, oh, there's all of those things in there I haven't tested so far. So what else can we do here? Going back to our moves routine, currently we have a situation where, for example, if I hit the bishop, I did mention this a few minutes ago, if I hit the bishop, then we're getting, as you can see, we only want the diagonal selected for the bishop, just like when we hit a rook, we only want the straight lines selected for the rook. So we need some kind of mechanism here. We need some kind of mechanism to distinguish between the pieces, and then to tell Excel, well, for this piece, you need to do the diagonal moves. For this piece, you don't need to do the diagonal moves, and for this piece, you need to do the straight line moves, etc., etc. Remember, we've got knight moves to come as well, and then we've got kind of limitations on the moves too. So we've got some more rules to put in. So we've got to think about how are we going to put those rules in. Now, my idea for this, and as always, not absolutely sure if this is going to work, but it's in the spirit of the series. You know, there's a certain amount of working things out as we go along, as we do code. Things are never perfect. I'm thinking of having 3 columns here, and then we can say can move diagonally, and then we can say can move, let's just say vertical, so it can go up and down, can move horizontal. Okay. In fact, we could just say, we could combine these into one, can't we? So we could say can move straight line. Yes. And then can move diagonally, can move in straight line. And then what are the other kind of types of moves we've got? We talked about moving a diagonal like a bishop, moving a straight line like a rook. A queen can do both of those things, of course. Well, can do knight move, we could say. Okay, so for the knights, this is going to be important. What are the other kind of ways we could define the different moves? We could say can only move 1 square. The king can only move 1 square. And then I'm sure these are going to become apparent as we continue to work through this task. But what we can do now is go through the pieces here, then just quickly populate this table. So I've got pawns here. I'm going to hit the Control D shortcut. They can't, but they kind of can move diagonally, can't they? Okay, right. So maybe that's something else for us to put in. Okay, now I won't put that in now because, yeah, pawns can move diagonally if they're capturing pieces, of course. But I don't want to overcomplicate at this point. I just want to set up this mechanism to tell Excel, yeah, this can do a diagonal move, this can do a straight line move. Let's try to keep this simple for the time being. So it can move diagonally, pawns can't. So Control D there. A rook can't, so that's a no. A knight can't, a knight's just going to have the special knight move. A bishop can, so that's a Y. A queen can, which is a Y. A king can, but only one square. So maybe we'll sort that out in a second. And a bishop can, a knight can't, and a rook can't. Okay, so I've just put those letters in there. I'm going to copy these down. Copy these down to the end of the table now because, yeah, our data is well organized. It's in the same order. Then we can just copy this down. Just going to get that into your screenshots. Then a straightforward copy paste there. Control V on the Windows PC, of course. Okay, so we've got this table now. Now what I want us to do is for Excel to look up the piece, name, and then to look in this table and establish, can this piece move diagonally? Can this piece move diagonally? If it can move diagonally, then we're going to show those diagonal moves. If it can't move diagonally, then we're not going to show those diagonal moves at all. And let's just look at how we might put this into the VBA editor. Yeah, so we've got this statement here, which we might have to subsequently fragment. But we want to say here, yep, so this is the diagonal row kind of syntax here. This is telling Excel if this square is on a diagonal row, is on a diagonal relative to the piece. So here we also want to say if it's on a diagonal and this piece can move diagonally, and the piece can move diagonally because only bishops and queens can, and the king 1 square, then yes, this is a possible move. So we need to put an additional condition here. But first, we need to think, well, how are we going to look this up in the table? How are we actually going to do that? And let's work it out. What could we possibly use? Well, we've got the names of the pieces here. So we know we can extract the name of the piece using application.caller. So let's take that piece name and let's look up the piece in this table, and then let's look across to this column. And if we've got a Y in this column, then the diagonal move is possible. Now, for the time being, I'm going to use a variable, and let's call it a Boolean variable. I'm going to call diapos. Okay, diagonal move possible. And this let's call this a Boolean variable because it's going to be true or false. Okay, and then as we application.caller.top left cell address. Okay, so this is a diagonal move possible with this piece. There we go. And then we want to get the name of the piece and put it into this table here. I'm just looking at this table. Do we have a name for this table yet? Don't think we do. Numbers format, anchor cell, black cell, board format, EPOS format. Okay, I'm actually looking at these names and thinking they could be improved. I don't think I'll go into this now, but usually I have a naming convention for names in a spreadsheet file. And I actually use this. You see where it says EPOS format? This is a better naming convention. E stands for engine because it's on the engine sheet. And then POS format gives us some information about what the cell actually does. So maybe I'll go through and improve these names to line them up with my proper naming conventions. So let's give this table a name. And I'm just going to select it here. And it's on the engine sheet, so I'm going to say E, and then let's call it moves table. Okay, E underscore, and then moves table. Okay, then I'm just going to hit enter, and I can see, yeah, it appears here. And then I'm just going to check in the name manager. Has Excel understood that I've created that name? Yep, check to the name manager. We've got E moves table there. So we want to take the name of the piece and then look it up in that table. I'm just going to see, can we get that name? Can we get the piece name just from clicking the piece? How could we test that first? Let's just say, okay, right. I'm going to say put right at the top of this routine. I'm going to say let's do a copy paste first. So I'm going to take this. Get myself on the other side of the screen there. I'm going to take this line of code here, Control C, and then we're going to say message box, and then just Control V, copy that code in. Now, what's the property of the object here? So what about the shape am I interested in? Just the name of the shape here. Can I extract that information, get the name of the shape? We're going to use that shape name in the table. Look that up in the table. Can the piece move diagonally? That's the process we're trying to work through. Then I'm just going to say exit sub. I don't want to do anything else. I'm wary that the modes might change. I don't want to change the mode and then not execute the whole routine. That might kind of mess things up. So just put exit sub here. So what am I expecting to happen? This code, of course, executes when we click on one of the pieces. So I'm going to go to one of the pieces here, and we can see, yeah, a message box saying the name of the piece. So Message boxes are so useful for understanding what Visual Basic is understanding. What does Visual Basic understand? We can extract a piece of information using a message box. I do it all the time when I'm testing. So I'm happy with that. So we want to effectively perform a VLOOKUP. And as always, there's multiple ways of doing this. One way we could do it is using some helper cells. We could have a cell here, put the piece name in the cell, and then have a formula to do it. But it's a little bit slicker, a little bit more efficient, a little bit faster, we could say, to use a worksheet function called from Excel VBA. How do we do that? And where are we going to put this as well? Okay, let's put it, location of piece that trigger the macro. Just going to put this annotation on the same line of code here because it's taking up too much kind of vertical space there. It doesn't need to be on a new line. Okay, right. So we're going to say this variable. In fact, I'm going to put some annotations in first. So check possible move types. Okay, let's say possible move types. A move type being, well, it can move diagonally. It can move in straight lines. It can do a night move. And check possible move types. And I might conceivably have, 7 or 8 different variables for these different move types. Okay, right. So check diagonal first. Check. Okay, let's just say can piece move diagonally. Okay, very important, using annotations here, pseudocode, we could call this. So we're writing out in our native language what we're trying to do. That makes the process of doing the coding easier. So the variable name, diapos is diagonal possible. Diapos equals, then we're going to say application.worksheet function. And then this is going to be a VLOOKUP, of course. And we need dot VLOOKUP, and then what are we looking up? Well, we're looking up the piece name. And should I allocate this to a variable? Yep, I think this is a good idea. So I could use this in the VLOOKUP, but that's a lot of writing. That's a lot of syntax. Let's simplify things by allocating this to a variable. And I'm going to do this. Yep, let's do this here. Let's call this variable piece name. Comment this out a second. Now, when I'm doing a coding session, it's kind of a just a vanity thing. But I try to get through a coding session without any errors, which is why I'm commenting out all of these lines of code, because they would return an error if I didn't complete that line of code. All these partial lines of code, that's why I'm commenting them out. Just a vanity thing, trying to avoid those error messages, although they can be helpful, of course. But I don't need them because the line of code isn't complete yet. Right, and let's say piece name. This is a string variable. It's going to contain text, name of the piece. And I could see us using this later in the routine. So I think it's a good idea to create this variable. Okay, so piece underscore name equals, there we go. So just assign piece name to variable, variable, English spelling, always struggle with that. Okay, there we go. And then we can begin to complete this line of code. So what are we looking up? Well, the piece name, which we've now allocated to a variable, so it's easier just to type in the variable name. And then what's the range? We know the second component of the VLOOKUP formula is the range. So the range was E moves table, I think. Okay. Then what column in the table are we looking at? Well, we're looking at, okay. Yeah, there's certainly one thing I need to do here. So I need to make sure that the leftmost column of this table contains the piece of information that we want to look up, because we want to look up the piece name, and we know VLOOKUP looks in the leftmost column of the table. So I'm just going to check how I define this name, eMoves table. Yeah, you see this isn't quite going to work, and I think the easiest way to do this would be just to adjust the named range. Now, I'm a bit wary of this because we're going to have a named range that excludes some information. So we're going to exclude column B, but I think it's the best approach. Maybe we'll come back to it in the future. It might cause us a problem in the future. We're not absolutely sure. Right, edit this. So I'm just going to change this to C so that this name range starts in column C rather than column B. Close that, and then going to check eMoves table. Yep, I can see the reference there. And then what column is it going to be? This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's going to be the 5th column. Okay, we know for VLOOKUP, we need to tell Excel which column to look in. Back to the VBA editor. And then, yeah, I commented out this line of code. Let's just put an underscore in here, move on to a new line. So it's column 5. And then is it 0 or 1? It's going to be 0. And then I just think we need a single bracket here. So perhaps we can get rid of that underscore. You think you can just see it in your screenshot, just above me there. You can just see it in your screenshot. And there we go, and managed to avoid that VBA editor. So my ego still intact here. Okay, so how can we do this? Well, let's step through the code and let's see what happens here. In fact, I'm just going to have a couple of message boxes here. Message box piece name. I want to check that that piece name variable is working well. Then let's have a message box for the diapos here. Okay, so what are we expecting diapos to return? Well, we're expecting Excel to go into this table, look up the piece name, and then to return a Y or an N. And in fact, because we have a Boolean variable here, then, okay. I'm going to change this to a string variable. So that variable is just going to hold the Y or the N from the table, just going to hold a piece of text. We can use that later to understand, does this piece move diagonally or not? Control S, save the file. Again, just sense checking the code. Can I anticipate any errors here? Okay, back to the board. Hitting the pawn there. Okay, variable not defined. Okay, yep. So I need to be more specific about this range. I've treated this as you'll treat a variable rather than treating it as a named range. So let's say range engine. Sorry, sheets engine, I should say. Sheets engine dot range eMoves table. There we go. And then closing the bracket there. So that, you can see I've introduced the underscore here, which has allowed me to put the code across, to extend it across 2 lines there. Again, doing the sense check seems reasonable. Okay, clicking on a piece. Message box B, pawn 4. Good. And then, okay, we didn't get that second message box. So what happened there? Okay, why didn't we get the second message box there? We've got a message box here. Okay, B pawn 4. Thank you. Then we didn't get a message. Okay, what's happening here then? Of course. Well, I didn't delete this line of code that I was using to test originally. So we just delete that. Okay, so what happens now? B pawn 5, okay. And then we've got nothing there. Right, so that says to me we haven't quite got this VLOOKUP function that we're putting in. Not quite accurate yet. Okay, so let's check this again. eMoves table, the 5th column. So my guess would be that should be 4 rather than 5. Aha. Okay, classic mistake. Okay, so you can see I've lost some work there as well. So we're going to have to put some values back in. So what's happened is when we ran this code, it's cleared this area. And previously we cleared this area because we're using this area to write in using this area to write in the possible moves, of course. Okay, so let's just how to do this then. Okay, so these possible moves are being written in around here. So range F14. So I'm just going to change that range to K14. Or in fact, let's just switch this process off for the time being. So where we're inputting the references onto the engine sheet here, so these references here, just switch that off for the time being. Now we're also clearing that range. So this code here is clearing that range. We're going to switch that off for the time being as well. So clear moves area. I'm going to switch this off for the time being. Okay, so I'm going to write a reminder in there, switch on later, and then another reminder here, input, and then switch on later. Okay, so those should now be switched off effectively, so those things shouldn't happen. But now now I've got to put this information in here again. So this is where usually, I'm in a very bad mood now, having to repeat work, and this is where you're most likely to make a mistake as well, of course. So I'm being as careful as I can, and these four can all move diagonally. The knight can't and the rook can't. Okay, then the same thing, just going to copy paste that down. Okay, so we've got our information back there. Save the file. Just going to take some water here. Try to manage those emotions back down. Then we get back into the code. Save the file again. Control S, compulsive file saver I am. And then, okay, what happens? And then we've got the name of the piece. That was working fine before. And then we've got an N. Does that make sense? Well, we clicked on a pawn, so that seems to make sense. Now let's click on a bishop. So a bishop can move diagonally. So we're expecting to get a Y here. Got the bishop there and a Y. That seems to work. What other pieces can move diagonally? The queen can move diagonally. White queen, that's correct. And then yes, it can. So I'm happy with the piece name element. So I'm just going to get rid of the message box that is displaying the piece name. Okay, but I want to keep testing this the diapos variable. Bishop, yes, can move diagonally. Bishop, yes, can move diagonally. And then let's just do a couple more tests. The king, black king, yes, can move diagonally. And the black rook can't move diagonally. Okay, so I'm happy with that. So that mechanism should be working okay. So we've got a table working with the VBA editor via this application.worksheet function. So we're taking a spreadsheet formula and using it in VBA. This is usually a very efficient way to work. It does require some intricate coding and good knowledge of the formulae, because you've effectively put the formula together without using the prompts that Excel gives you. You could see that I mess it up, and I regularly mess that kind of thing up. But yeah, we were able to save the file, test it, and fix it. So that's totally normal for us. Okay, I'm going to get rid of this message box. So we've done the testing of that variable. So just to kind of complete this task, we want to say to Excel here, you remember this line of code is where we're testing if the square is on a diagonal relative to the piece, but we want to do something else. We want to introduce a new condition here. If the square is on a diagonal relative to our piece, and if the piece can move diagonally. Now that piece of information, if the piece can move diagonally, we have that information. We have that information in our diapos variable that we created. So how to do this? Okay, so I'm going to simplify this slightly. I do see us fragmenting this conditional statement anyway. I'm just going to comment out these two lines here. Might get an error. There's the error. And then and. Okay, I'm going to put and here. Underscore pos equals y. of course. So we've got a string variable there, and it's going to be holding the value of y. And then we need a then, I believe, and if. Yes, that's correct. So we can put then there. So yeah, we integrated these additional conditions. Now I've taken them out of the code again because I want to check, can I combine these two conditions together in this way? Is that going to work? If that does work, then we're going to do the same with the other conditions. But I always get confused combining together ors and ands. So maybe we'll separate these out into multiple conditions and use a variable to kind of establish if this is a possible move or not. We'll get onto that in the next video. So what are we expecting to happen? Well, we're only expecting moves to appear if the piece can actually move diagonally. So if we have a pawn, for example, we've got no moves appearing here. And we've got no moves appearing here because the pawn can't move diagonally. The knight also can't move diagonally. But when we click the bishop, we're expecting some moves to come up. So clicking the bishop now, and the moves have come up. Let's try the white bishop, and the moves have come up. Okay, what about the white pawn? Yep, clearly there's no moves available there. And what about the white king? The king can move diagonally. So we've got diagonal moves there. White bishop can move diagonally. White knight can't move diagonally. Okay. And this kingside bishop can move diagonally. Black king can move diagonally. The queen can. And the bishop can. And the pawn can't there. And this pawn can't. So finally, let's just do kingside bishop. And that bishop can. Okay, so that's as far as we'll go in this video. But you can see gradually we've taken something that's very difficult to do, which is to program these moves, put in lots of simplifying assumptions, and then we're gradually taking those simplifying assumptions out one by one. So in the next video, we'll see if we've done this for diagonal moves, can we do the same for those straight line moves? Then we're going to have to get on to topics like how to do knight moves and things like that. Thank you so much for watching. Really hope you're getting some value out of the series. Let me know in the comments what you think. See you in the next video.